You want to allow experimentation. You want to pick your battles and focus on reducing risk that you can actually prove exists. You want to secure the baseline first. You should be able to create an innovation-friendly environment. Hi, this is Carsten from Hacking Matters, where each week we discuss the best practices in cybersecurity. Today we look at risk acceptances. That is a formalized process to say, yes, we want to innovate, and we're sometimes accepting some of the risks that come from it. This continues our previous discussion on the moderated risk dialogue. You might recall how the CISO, the leader of the security team, is engaged with other business and technology leaders for them to jointly decide which technologies and which risks are fit for an organization. Today we're looking at how this is being formalized through risk acceptances. Optimally, we would not have any risks, but then we also wouldn't have any experiments. And it is exactly the balance between experiments that enable innovation and risk reduction that we're trying to achieve. Because the sad truth is, if you don't innovate because you find risk reduction more important, somebody else will innovate and take those customers, those market shares away from you. So ultimately, your customers are ending up with the innovation anyway, with or without you. Risks are easiest to accept early in a technology journey because at this point it is unclear whether the technology will ever be used by a lot of people or by high volume transaction. And so risks are often accepted only for a limited period of time to allow the experiments to conclude whether or not the technology is a winner, and only when it is making the cut, then starting to secure it. Implementing a risk acceptance process along these different life cycles is based on three principles. The first principle is that you want to allow experimentation. No company can survive forever without trying out new things, and today that often means new technology. And as the security team, as the security leader, it's your obligation to allow these experiments to happen while preempting that in the future you might need to secure them. Second, you want to pick your battles and focus on reducing risk that you can actually prove exist. So if you, for instance, compare a red team report with a vulnerability scan, the red team report is written by humans who actually broke into your organization, who can show what exactly went wrong and what you need to fix to make their journeys harder. Whereas a vulnerability scan has a lot of evidence that there might be problems, missing patches, missing hardening settings, but no actual straight-through hacking journey. So prioritizing between those two, you do want to look at the top-down risk where you can explain what a risk scenario looks like, rather than just saying some tool says we have an issue. And the third best practice, you want to secure the baseline first. So while allowing experiments is very important, not everything should be experimented with. For instance, authentication systems are very easy to get wrong security-wise, but are also a staple in most organizations in that everyone should use the same authentication system, should preferably use the same identity store, have one customer identity, have one employee identity. We discussed this in other videos. So allowing people to experiment around that and maybe get it wrong might not be in your best interest security-wise. Between those three best practices, allow experimentation, focus on top-down risk, and secure the baseline, you should be able to create an innovation-friendly environment. But you as the security leader, of course, don't get to decide what innovation you need. You are just part of the moderated process that concludes which risks are worth taking and which are overburdening. Now let's talk about the risk acceptances, how to reach that consensus. Allow me to illustrate risk acceptances using an example that I experienced working in India, where we were building what today is one of the largest critical infrastructures in the world, a nationwide digital ecosystem, a mobile network, cloud systems, and so forth. In that ecosystem, we were securing over 400 applications towards a very ambitious launch target. And you can imagine that, of course, we can't secure everything among 400 applications to the exact same level. So constantly we had to ask the question of which risks are too big to ignore and which others can we deprioritize for the moment and allow that innovation to happen first, and then getting ready to secure them if and only if the customers gravitate towards those applications. It turns out, of course, most applications are not successful. You have to run a lot of experiments to have some winners. So as the security leader, of course, you want to focus on those winners primarily. The risk acceptances are then built in 5 steps. Step 1, you as a security leader note down risk scenarios. That's not pen test findings, that's not red team findings, but that's the translation of those into a business scenario that hurts. For instance, back in India, before the geo launch, we knew that the network would launch unencrypted. The technology just wasn't ready yet. Approaching business leaders with that information, of course, prompted their question, what's the negative outcome for us? What's going to happen if we leave it unencrypted? And we constructed 2 risk scenarios. One saying somebody, a celebrity, might have their phone calls publicized, and this would reflect really badly on us as a company. The second scenario would be more around government folks who also might have some phone calls leaked, and this might lead to regulatory actions, neither of which we wanted to happen. So it was clear that we had to fix these issues in an ambitious timeline, and yet there was a short period of time after the launch before we could secure this where these risks were real. So first step, we had to note down these 2 scenarios, the more Bollywood-focused scenario, the more Delhi-focused scenario, to get everyone onto the discussion. The second step, still with the security leader, is documenting compensating factors, saying for some period of time we can do these or these countermeasures to make it more difficult for the hackers and thereby less likely for these risks to manifest themselves. And for instance, back in India again, and this being a 4G network, we didn't actually use the voice technology of this network at the very beginning. So one of the compensating factors was to focus on using an app instead of normal phone calls to bridge that stopgap as an offer, as an option if the management decided that the hacking risks were too large. Step 3 now, where the security team involves the actual responsible team, a business leader or technology leader. In this case, the CTO responsible for building and configuring the network. This technology leader now has to fill into the risk acceptance the business rationale for launching anyway, for going ahead, basically describing the pros versus the cons that we already captured. In our case, saying we're building this infrastructure to bring 400 million people onto the internet who otherwise are offline, bringing communication, education, just global interaction to a population who currently has no access to it. Step number 4 now is in the hands of that business or technology leader whom the risk represented to. They need to document whether we want to go ahead anyway, even though the security team found some issues. And in the case of launching a mobile network, for instance, they would document, we are embarking on a large journey here, bringing hundreds of millions of people onto the internet who otherwise will stay disconnected, bringing communication, information, education to those people. And we need to do this sooner rather than later to bring India into the digital age. And those very temporary, relatively small risks are worth accepting. So now, after going through these first 4 steps, you know which risk exists, you know which risk scenarios would possibly happen, you know which compensating controls are there. You had a discussion with the CTO on those risks and the compensating factors. And finally, you have an opinion of the risk stakeholder saying, yes, on balance, the opportunity still outweighs the risk because this is how I look at the opportunity. And now the final and 5th step is to present this to a risk committee, in this case, for instance, the board that decides on launch dates and launch parameters, and to get the acknowledgement that, yes, the benefits outweigh the risks. Every risk acceptance, though, is time limited. So this is not a carte blanche forever, but rather a temporary stopgap so we can move on in innovation and continue bringing benefits, in this case, bringing people online. So you see how security is an opinion, and in this case, the first opinion in risk acceptance, but it's not the most important opinion. It is exactly on balancing the opportunities with risks that risk acceptances allow. Accepting risks is healthy, it's important, it's necessary for companies to continuously challenge and reinvent themselves, but doing that in a somewhat moderated manner where experiments are understood in terms of risk before they're taken, but not prevented by the security people because there's risks involved. So there you have it. Security in balance with innovation so that the customers stay with us, that the market share stays with us, and that ultimately that we can bring security to more and more people. This discussion is embedded in our larger arc on discussing the security team, the security leader, and the trade-off between innovation and risk. There's 3 videos on those topics that you might want to check out. To learn more about how to look at risk top-down, I recommend a video on red teaming, where we look at how ethical hackers conceptualize breaking into companies. And finally, on the topic of where you should put your emphasis, look at the video on the cyber defense funnel, where we look at 3 areas and argue that as long as you're okay, mediocre in all 3 of them, you're better than average and you're probably secure enough. I hope this was insightful. If you learned anything, please show it with a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Happy hacking.